I never imagined a summer night could twist itself into something so dark, so cold, as if the very heat that usually clings to the air had fled, leaving behind a suffocating chill that crept into every bone and shadow. This particular summer night started off like any other, heavy with sticky humidity and the distant buzz of cicadas that filled the warm air like an unyielding symphony of nature. Fireflies danced erratically, their faint lights flickering among the tall grass just outside my window. The smell of wet earth mixed with a gentle waft of blooming jasmine, creating a deceptively peaceful scene that belied the terror lurking just beyond the walls of our old family home. My parents had left me alone in that house, alone during a storm that surged in suddenly, tearing ragged holes through the calm night sky. They'd been invited to an event at a friend's nearby house, and facing the relentless downpour that had made driving too dangerous on the winding roads, opted to stay the night there rather than risk the journey back to our home. Their voices on a landline before they left still echo in my mind, hesitant, apologetic, layered with unease, carrying a tremble I hadn't understood then but recognized now. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl rolling closer, warning of the storm's growing fury. Inside the house, the summer heat wrapped around me like a thick blanket. The windows were cracked open just enough to catch what little breeze the night offered, curtains fluttering softly under the porch light. I was only 10 or 11, caught between childhood innocence and the intoxicating thrill of newfound freedom that came from staying up late, unshackled from rules and bedtime scoldings. I laid stretched out on the living room couch, my hands sticky with melted candy wrappers, eyes fixed on the glowing TV screen that flickered with static between channels. The restless mass of crickets outside sang endlessly, as if signaling the night's ominous arrival. Eventually, weariness crept up and sapped my energy. Sleep claimed me in its indifferent grasp, but I awoke hours later to a strange chill, sharp enough to pierce through the sweat-soaked skin of a humid summer night. The TV was dark, and the house was unervingly silent save for the distant crackle of the storm gathering pace once again beyond the windows. The usual comforting symphony of nocturnal life, the chirps, hums, and rustling leaves, was replaced by an oppressive stillness, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I tightened my hold on the blanket wrapped around me, tried to anchor myself amidst the unnatural quiet. Perhaps the air conditioner had died, or the storm had knocked out the power, but something deeper, more sinister wormed its way into my thoughts. The sensation of being watched prickled my skin, and a cold dread seeped into my bones. Even with the windows drawing in the moist summer air, a heaviness pressed down on the room, suffocating and palpable. I had locked every door and window, just as my mother had instructed me repeatedly, yet the atmosphere felt charged with something wrong, as though the summer air recoiled from a dark presence inside. Then I heard it, a faint creak, deliberate and slow, originating from the far corner of the living room where shadows pooled like spilled ink on worn hardwood. The sound didn't belong to the storm or the house settling. It echoed with malice, deliberate intent. My heart thundered in my chest as my eyes fixed on the closet door near the window, shut tight when I fell asleep, but now, under flashing lightning, it stood ajar, leaking darkness like thick smoke. My breath hitched, dry and shallow. I felt frozen, caught between terror and disbelief, before I forced myself to tiptoe down the hallway, the humid summer air wrapping around me like cold chains. My pulse hammered loud enough to drown out the storm's distant roar, and yet I could hear every creak of the floor beneath my feet. In the faint glow of the streetlight outside, two bare feet stumbled across the floor, muddy, twisted, pale in the flickering street lamp's unsteady luminescence. The legs they belonged to looked wrong, scarred and trembling, a sickly yellow that contrasted sharply with the vibrant chaos of summer night colors. Suddenly, a wrench slipped from trembling hands, crashing loudly onto the wooden floor with a clang that shattered the silence. The chaotic footsteps faltered, then thundered erratically again, echoing through the house as thunder rolled outside. The front door slammed behind the figure, stomping off into the storm. Gone. That summer night shattered the fragile bubble of childhood safety I'd clung to. The once pleasant hum of summer's insects morphed into a sinister chorus that haunted every dark corner. Days blurred, heat waves shimmering in an unending haze of fear and suspicion. At school, I told myself it was simply a lost stranger caught by the storm, nothing more. But the damp footprint on our porch and the wrench left behind told another, darker story. From that day, I stopped telling the tale. The fear curled inward, festering in the muggy air of summer nights, thick and suffocating. Night lights barely pushed back the creeping darkness. Sometimes, when the storms returned and wild winds tore across the landscape, scratchings would scratch faintly at the windows, soft, deliberate, mocking. I was trapped in nightmares that twisted my mind. I saw myself on the ceiling as a ghostly observer, helpless to act. The digital clock counted backwards. Strange childish drawings, unfamiliar yet haunting with their endless smiles, decorated my bedroom walls. Figures linked hand in hand before a house with a blue roof. An old toy train sat misplaced on the floor, though I had lost it years ago. And just beyond my bedroom window, the man with the scar would appear, watching, always watching, with hands clawing at the glass as if desperate to come inside. And through that thick, suffocating, humid summer, he waits still, tapping, waiting, cold even in the stifling heat. The nights after that first terrifying summer storm became a battleground between a part of me that still clung to childhood innocence and the creeping terror that had rooted itself deep inside my mind. Sleep, once a refuge, transformed into an arena of shadows and panic. I found myself slipping into the same recurring nightmare night after night, but it was nothing like the typical dreams of being chased or falling. This nightmare was worse. It forced me out of my body, watching myself in the ceiling, as a hovering like a ghost tethered to my own fragile frame. I was helpless, trapped, unable to scream or move, pinned beneath an invisible weight that twisted my insides and held my terror tight beneath a suffocating silence. My childish bedroom warped into something unreal and sinister beneath flickering lights and shifting walls that breathed in the dark. The digital clock on my nightstand no longer ticked forward but blinked backwards, counting down time lost. Strange drawings taped to the walls mocked me. Figures holding hands with frozen smiles standing before a house crowned with a blue roof. I couldn't recall ever making those drawings, and the toy train resting on the floor was one I lost years ago. Yet there it was, always in a different spot when I dared to look, beyond the glass window of my bedroom. The shadow appeared, always the same man with the scarred temple, his eyes hollow yet piercing through the night air. He stood silently, watching me, and then began clawing at the glass, desperate to breach the fragile barrier between us. His silent presence wrapped me in a dread that was greater than fear. It was pure, suffocating hopelessness. I woke trembling and cold despite the summer heat, the room seeming to chill around me like icy breath. When I told my parents about the dreams, their responses felt distant and dismissive, like childish fears best forgotten. But their reassurances couldn't reach the trembling part of me, the part that understood in dim intuition that this was no ordinary nightmare. One night, as the humid air hummed thick with the sound of cicadas and sweat-clinging summer heat, the tapping began again, slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I lay frozen beneath the pale glow of my nightlight, heart hammering as the man's silhouette emerged outside the window. His scarred face was outlined by streetlights, eyes devoid of warmth or mercy. His insidious tapping traced maddening rhythms on the glass, a prehistoric call that echoed in the silent spaces of my mind. It was a summons, a promise, a warning that no one else seemed to hear or believe. When I roused my parents and showed them the faint footprints inscribed in the wet earth under the window, the stark evidence of intrusion, they glanced at each other uneasily but said nothing more. I sensed their unease buried beneath casual reassurances, a reluctant admission that some truths were better left unspoken. From that night on, the boundary between nightmare and reality blurred into an indistinguishable haze. Shadows lengthened and breathed with hidden life. My mind spun webs of suspicion and dread. The house that had once been my sanctuary morphed into a cage where I was both prisoner and prey. I found myself pacing endless hallways, clutching walls damp with summer sweat, avoiding darkened rooms where malevolent silence pulsed like a living thing. The house whispered secrets I could not decipher, faint sounds in empty rooms, shifting shadows in my peripheral vision, a smell of burnt wood lingering with no source. Sometimes I thought I was losing my mind, swallowed whole by the darkness. I could neither fight nor flee. But part of me knew the malevolence was real and patient, waiting for the moment I would falter and let it claim me entirely. Days and nights bled into each other beneath the scorched summer sky. The heat pressed down with relentless weight, as stifling and inescapable as the fear gripping my soul. School became a distant fog. Conversations faded beneath the constant hum of dread, and the nights grew worse. The tapping never stopped. The man never left. By then, even my parents noticed a change. The haunted look in my eyes, the way my voice trembled when I spoke of nightmares, the way I jumped at shadows or noises others dismissed as trivial. They insisted on doctors and therapists, clinics and medications, scientific explanations to mask the creeping horror. I complied, desperate for peace, swallowing pills that dulled but never erased the terror. The walls of my mind fractured, memories invaded by doubt and fear, unsure if the man was nightmare or nightmare made flesh. And yet, sometimes in the thick silence of the humid summer night, when the restless pulses of cicadas slowed and the world seemed to hold its breath, I felt him, watching just beyond sight, waiting patiently for the moment when I would finally succumb. The weight of fear didn't simply vanish with the dawn's first light. Instead, it settled into every corner of my waking world, seeping into the fabric of my days like a poison slowly taking hold. I tried to bury the memories beneath layers of distraction, schoolwork, summer friends, games, and laughter, but the shadow remained. It was like a slow-burning ember festering beneath my skin, ready to spark a fire at any moment. Each night, as summer stretched on, the air thick with humidity and steam rolling off sun-baked asphalt, the terror returned. Sometimes in whispers, sometimes in stark flashes. I found myself unable to trust my own mind. Shadows at the edges of my vision morphed into figures. Every stray sound echoed like the tapping of unseen fingers on glass. The house itself seemed to breathe and pulse with hidden life. Walls creaked in unnatural rhythms. Floorboards groaned beneath imagined steps. No longer was the scare confined to dreams. Daytime became a series of anxious moments punctuated by a heart pounding at unseen threats. The lines between nightmare and reality blurred until I was never sure which world I inhabited. I felt trapped in a waking nightmare that tightened its grip with each passing sunset. My parents noticed a change too, how I'd flinch at sudden sounds, retreat into silence, lose interest in the summer's pleasures. Their worry was a dull ache, drowned beneath busy schedules and my own silence. They urged me to see doctors, counselors, a parade of professionals eager to unpack the trauma I couldn't explain. Pills came and went, numbing edges but never silencing the primal dread. I drifted, lost between the realms of childhood and something older, darker, where terror wasn't just an emotion, but a living, breathing entity. And through it all, the scarred man with hollow eyes lingered in my thoughts. A specter haunted me on the edge of every dream, waiting ever patiently outside my window in the humid summer night, tapping in cruel rhythms only I could hear. Some nights, when the cicadas' chorus fell silent, I swear I hear the faintest echo of his footsteps, soft footfalls in the sticky grass, barely there but undeniably real, trailing through the night toward me. And I know, the nightmare isn't over. Days bled slowly into weeks, each one pressing down on me like the thick, humid air that clung to my skin all summer long. The boundary between nightmare and reality continued to blur, leaving me adrift in a waking fog of paranoia. I found myself retreating from friends and family, cocooning within the stagnant walls of our old house where the air smelled faintly of dust, rain-soaked earth, and something I couldn't name, a faint but persistent trace of decay and fear. Every creak in the floor, every whisper of the wind outside the cracked windows sent a shiver racing down my spine. I imagined a man with a scar lurking in every darkened corner, stalking me silently like a predator in the natural world. Sometimes, when the night stretched long and quiet, I thought I could hear his footsteps ticking just beyond the edge of hearing, accompanied by the endless, distant chorus of summer insects buzzing in the heavy heat outside. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination unraveling from the trauma, but the unease was too real, too sharp. Even in the brightness of daylight, shadows seemed to follow my every move, twisting and shifting just out of the corner of my eye. Leaving the house to join other kids at the nearby park or river provided brief reprieve, but the memory of that night, of the cold, muddy feet and the wrench dropped so carelessly on the floor, remained burned into my thoughts, a constant threat. Sleep became more elusive by the day. The nightmares evolved, growing more vivid, more haunting. Eyes that deserved to be empty stared at me from the darkness. The tapping at the window grew more relentless. I stopped telling myself these were dreams and began to fear the moments just before waking, when the boundary thinned and I teetered on the edge of something else. Something I feared crossing into. The man's figure, always scarred and silent, haunted the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't safe. The blue-roofed house from my dreamscape seemed less fictional with every passing night. My parents' concern deepened, their questions more urgent and their patience wearing thin. I tried to explain, but my words faltered beneath the weight of my terror. Doctors and therapists offered words like anxiety and PTSD, handed me medicines that dulled the sharp edges but never banished the shadows. I complied, desperate for any semblance of normalcy, but the ghost never left me. In the unbearable heat of those final summer nights, I realized the true horror wasn't just in the dark corners of the house or in a stalker's footsteps. It was in the fear of becoming part of me, a shadow stitched into the fabric of my being, waiting silently for the moment I might succumb. The nightmares began to spill over into my waking life, like ink dissolving into water, coloring every moment with dread. The summer days stretched on, hot and relentless, filled with the screech of cicadas and the lingering scent of wilted grass and rain-soaked earth. Yet beneath the sun's blistering gaze, a looming shadow clung to me, a weight more suffocating than the stifling humidity that pressed against my skin. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through the motions but feeling detached, haunted not only by the memories of that night, but by the figure that never quite left my thoughts. The scarred man who lurked beyond my bedroom window materialized in every quiet moment, his hollow eyes burning into the back of my mind. His relentless tapping echoed in my skull, their rhythm a cruel reminder that the boundary between safety and terror had been shattered. Schoolyard laughter and summer adventures felt alien to me, distant echoes from a life I no longer belonged to. People's faces blurred into a haze of noise and color, their words muffled behind walls I'd built to keep the fear at bay. My parent concern became a dull ache, growing with every absent smile, every hollow glance. They tried to anchor me with therapy appointments and medication, but nothing could steady the unraveling threads of my mind. There were nights when I swore I could feel him, closer than ever, a presence lurking just beyond the veil of perception. The scent of damp earth and something metallic would fill the air, making my stomach knot and my limbs freeze. The windows trembled with each distant thunderclap, and the faintest tapping sounded like a promise whispered just outside my reach. The walls of our house seemed to close in, the summer heat turning every creak and whisper into a sinister language. I kept the curtains tightly drawn, but even behind the fabric, shadows shifted with malicious intent. The world I once knew was replaced by a labyrinth of fears and fading memories, where trust was a stranger and darkness an ever-present companion. One evening, the sky bruised with storm clouds, I sat alone in my room, the air thick with anticipation. The tapping started again, slow and precise, as if spelling out a sinister code only I could decipher. My breath caught as the silhouette appeared, his scarred face framed by the flickering streetlights. His eyes locked onto mine, empty voids promising unspeakable horrors. My heart thundered as I realized that this summer, like no other, marked the beginning of a battle not just for my body, but for my very soul. I began to feel as though the terror had seeped through every crack of my life. The summer's relentless sun couldn't burn away the shadows that clung to my skin, didn't touch the cold dread nestled in my chest. I felt watched, judged, hunted, even when surrounded by friends or beneath the bright blue sky. The memory of that night, the cold, clammy fingers of fear and the sickening sight of mud-streaked feet haunted me like a waking nightmare that refused to fade with daylight. My refuge became the stagnant air of my room, curtains drawn tight against the oppressive brightness outside. The familiar drone of cicadas and the rustling summer leaves became unwelcome reminders of the outside world I could no longer trust. I caught myself flinching at slight sounds, hiding from imagined threats that seemed all too real. I was becoming a stranger to myself, trapped in a prison constructed from fear and silence. My parents tried to help. They did everything they could with doctors and counselors, prescribed pills that promised relief, but only dulled the edges of my terror. Their kind words and worried eyes were like faint lights struggling against the engulfing dark, but the man with the scar lingered just beyond their sight and mine, always waiting, always tapping. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, about the tapping that echoed beneath my skin, about the silhouette that haunted every corner of my dreams. But the words caught in my throat, swallowed by shame and the fear that no one would understand. The night stretched long, thick with humidity and silence, broken only by the sinister rhythm of his tapping. I would lie awake, watching shadows creep across my walls, heart caught in a relentless drumbeat. The haunted house from my dreams, the house with the blue roof and frozen figures, became more than memory. It was a looming specter, a warning of things I barely dared to name. And through every scorching, sleepless summer night, I knew he was still out there, waiting. Story 2, Whispers Beneath the Lake. The heat of the summer pressed down on everything like an invisible weight. Even as night crawled over a small town, the air refused cool, thick, moist, and heavy with the scent of jasmine and grass just cut too late. I swear the night itself was holding its breath, waiting. There was something wrong about this particular summer, something I hadn't been able to put my finger on until that night. I was 17, caught between the restlessness of youth and the creeping dread that seemed to fall over the town with the lengthening shadows. My friends thought I was just being paranoid when I told them I didn't want to go down to the lake alone after dark. The warm, calm water beneath the sky, filled with too many stars, held something that didn't belong. The kind of silence so complete it pressed on your thoughts and made you hear things that weren't there. But when the phone call came, shaking my hand in the dark and letting loose a scream that belonged to someone else, all doubt dissolved. It was my sister calling in a panic, voice trembling. "Don't come to the lake. Don't, please. It's not safe." By the time I raced down the narrow dirt path, sweat stinging my eyes, the air felt different, electric, charged. There were no other sounds in the world except my ragged breaths and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. And then I saw her, or at least the silhouette of her, standing at the edge of the water, partly swallowed by night. Only she wasn't alone, and the shadows around her shifted with a life all their own. As I drew closer, the stillness of the night seemed to press heavier against my chest. The water of the lake mirrored the black sky, broken only by the faint glimmer of the moon carving silver lines between drifting clouds. My sister stood frozen at the shoreline, but something else moved around her, flickering shadows weaving between the trees, twisting, alive. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I noticed her eyes, wide, unblinking, reflecting something darker than the night itself. "Sarah?" I called out softly, but the air swallowed my voice whole. She didn't move, didn't respond. Then, a sudden splash shattered the silence. Far off, something had plunged into the water. The ripples echoed, spreading in slow, hypnotic rings. From the depths, faint whispers rolled toward me, voices whispered in language I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. Panic surged, but I forced my legs forward, my heart racing in a frantic rhythm. I reached her side and grabbed her arm, cold as ice. Her skin was clammy, her body stiff. "Sarah, we need to go." Before she could answer, the shadows shifted again. Figures emerged from the surrounding trees, tall, slender, their faces obscured beneath hoods woven from darkness itself. Their eyes gleamed, unnatural and empty. The lake was no longer just water and stars. It was a gateway, a veil where the unknown awaited. The heat of the summer pressed down on everything like an invisible weight. Even as night crawled over a small town, the air refused to cool, thick, moist, and heavy with the scent of jasmine and grass, just cut too late. I swear the night itself was holding its breath, waiting. There was something wrong about this particular summer, something I hadn't been able to put my finger on until that night. I was 17, caught between the restlessness of youth and the creeping dread that seemed to fall over the town with the lengthening shadows. My friends thought I was just being paranoid when I told them I didn't want to go down to the lake alone after dark. The warm, calm water beneath the sky, filled with too many stars, held something that didn't belong. The kind of silence so complete it pressed on your thoughts and made you hear things that weren't there. But when the phone call came, shaking my hand in the dark and letting loose a scream that belonged to someone else, all doubt dissolved. It was my sister calling in a panic, voice trembling. "Don't come to the lake. Don't! Please. It's not safe." By the time I raced down the narrow dirt path, sweat stinging my eyes, the air felt different, electric, charged. There were no other sounds in the world except my ragged breaths and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. And then I saw her, or at least the silhouette of her, standing at the edge of the water, partly swallowed by night. Only she wasn't alone, and the shadows around her shifted with life all their own. The figures in the trees advanced slowly, like shadows torn from the night itself, silent, tentative, yet charged with an impossible menace. I wanted to scream, to run, but the hot, thick air seemed to thicken around my throat, stealing my breath. My sister turned her head, eyes wild with fear yet devoid of recognition. "Sarah, it's me," I whispered, trembling. But her stare was empty as she took a step toward the water, the surrounding shadows growing darker, twisting. I reached out, grabbing her wrist, feeling a chill that burned to the sweat on my skin. "We need to get out of here, now." The night seemed to close in tighter as the figures encircled us, their faces obscured beneath shifting darkness. Their breath, cold and fetid, brushed against my neck like the whispered threat of death. The moon, dulled by racing clouds, flickered uncertainly. "Run!" My sister finally gasped, yanking her wrist free and stumbling toward the shore. The figures reached out, ethereal hands warping through space, brushing over trees, mud, and water, their touch sapping warmth from the world. The water itself seemed to pulse unnaturally, darkness pooling beyond its inky surface like a wound. I hesitated, torn between protecting Sarah and the overwhelming sensation that we had stumbled unknowingly into something ancient and vengeful. Shouts erupted behind us. My friends, drawn by my sister's panic call, the circle of shadows broke, and suddenly light flooded the clearing from our flashlights. The figures melted away like smoke in the wind, leaving only cold whispers drifting over the lake. Sarah clung to me, trembling, eyes still glassy with lingering fear. We retreated from the water's edge, the night finally losing some of its suffocating weight. Back at home, the air conditioner throbbed futilely against the unrelenting heat. But inside, the chill lingered. Something had followed us, some unseen stain that stained our memories and dreams. That summer marked the beginning of a series of nights where shadows crept closer, where the boundary between this world and the dark places beyond faded. I was trapped in a summer terror that refused to end, where every whisper wind could be a voice, every flicker of shadow a glimpse of the unknown. For days after we fled the lake, my life felt suspended in slow motion. The summer sun blazed relentlessly, but its warmth couldn't reach me. The image of those shadowy figures and my sister's vacant eyes haunted every waking moment. At night, when the world grew quiet and the insect song fell silent, I could still hear that tapping, gentle, purposeful, echoing through the humid air of my room. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, an overactive imagination fueled by fear and exhaustion. But rational thought was a fragile thread, easily snapped by the weight of dread pressing on my chest. Friends stopped asking me to hang out. My parents' concerned glances became more frequent as I withdrew further into myself. Sleep was no longer an escape, but a corridor to even darker places. One night, the calm was shattered. I was lying awake, the ceiling fan humming overhead, sweat pooling beneath me despite the late hour. A sudden whisper crawled into my ear, a breathy, unintelligible hiss that sent shivers down my spine. I bolted upright, heart hammering, searching the darkness for its source, but found only the familiar emptiness of my room. The tapping came again, louder this time, punctuated by soft scratching noises. I realized it was coming from the window. Slowly, I turned my gaze to the glass pane, half expecting to see the scarred face of the man from my nightmares pressed against it. But the window was empty. The summer night outside was still and indifferent. Yet, the tapping would not cease. It felt like a code, a summons I couldn't ignore. Days later, I started noticing strange things around the house. Small items misplaced, doors left unlocked despite my certainty I'd secured them, cold spots lingering long after windows were closed. Paranoia gnawed at me relentlessly. Was someone inside the house while I slept? Was I losing my grip on reality? The shadows seemed to move just beyond my sight, and the silence screamed accusations no one else could hear. Desperation led me back to the lake, the place where it all began. Under the pale moonlight, the water shimmered like quicksilver, dark and infinite. I stepped slowly to the shore, senses on edge, as if expecting the shadows to rise again and pull me under. Then, from the depths, a whisper rose, soft, urgent, calling my name. I turned, heart pounding, but no one was there. Only ripples disturbed the surface, as if the lake was breathing, alive and waiting. Summer is endless here, a voice said behind me, cold, ancient, and full of finality. I spun around, but the summer night gave no answer. The days that followed felt like a suffocating haze. Summer's relentless heat weighed on my skin, but it was nothing compared to the pressure squeezing my chest every waking moment. The world around me moved on, school, friends, laughter, but I was trapped beneath an invisible shroud of dread. The lake, the shadows, the tapping, they haunted my every thought, turning even the brightest days murky with fear. I tried to outrun the memories, distracted myself with chores and small routines, but the terror clung to me like damp clothes. Every rustle of leaves, every sudden breeze, made my heart leap in anticipation. Shadows tilted at odd angles. The night air buzzed with unnatural silence. My refuge, my room, felt less safe by the day. One night, I awoke to a whisper so faint it might as well have been the wind, but my skin prickled and the hairs on my arms stood straight. The tapping started again, deliberate, insistent, at the window pane just inches from my face. I dared not look, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. The scarred man's silhouette etched itself against the moonlight, his hollow gaze boring into my soul. His hand traced a slow, deliberate pattern on the glass, as though marking a promise. I blinked, and the shadow fled beneath the window frame. Was it real, or just an echo from a nightmare? The summer nights bled into each other, all the same, heat, dread, the ceaseless tapping. My parents' gentle concern turned to urgent worry. They arranged doctors and therapists, words like anxiety, hallucinations, PTSD thrown like lifelines. The pills dulled the edges, but never the core. Between sessions, I felt the man's gaze linger in quiet moments, waiting, patient, and merciless. Helplessness twisted inside me as the boundary between sleep and wakefulness blurred. I felt caught in a cruel loop, the haunted blue house, the smiling drawings, the old toy train, all signs I couldn't interpret but knew were warnings. One humid night, unable to bear the silence, I returned to the lake alone. The still water mirrored the black sky, endlessly deep and full of secrets. I stood on the rocky shore as the air thickened. Then, from the dark depths, a voice whispered my name, soft but insistent like a beckoning. I knew then the summer would never truly end. I felt the invisible thread pulling me toward the place where it all began, the lake. Despite every warning in my mind, I knew I had to face it, to understand what waited beneath the glassy surface and in the dark spaces between the trees. The sticky heat clung to my clothes as I made my way through the tangled woods, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. The familiar path twisted beneath my feet, now shadowed by the heavy canopy above. The silence deepened, broken only by the distant croak of frogs and the eerie rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. My heart thudded in rhythm with my footsteps, a pulsing drumbeat that was both prayer and warning. As I emerged at the water's edge, the cool lake stretched before me like a black mirror, reflecting the fractured moonlight. I felt a presence in the air, a stillness that pressed too close, a breath held in anticipation. The water rippled gently, disturbed by an unseen hand, and from its depths came a whisper that carried my name, soft and yet filled with a terrible promise. I spun around, searching the shadows for the source of the voice, but found nothing but the dense forest watching silently. The lake whispered again, a song woven with sorrow and deceit, luring me toward the edge. Suddenly, the surface broke with splash, ripples cascading outward as the night seemed to shudder. A figure emerged, dark and indistinct, eyes glowing with otherworldly light. The scarred man stood before me, the same from all my dreams and fears, aching with a cruel patience. His voice, when he spoke, was a sound of wind through dead leaves. "Summer never ends here," he said, voice like a curse. "And neither does the waiting." I wanted to run, but my feet were locked in place, rooted by the cold terror that sank deep into my bones. The figure stepped closer, water dripping from his form like ink spilled upon the earth. His hand reached out, cold and real, brushing against my cheek. The world tipped, the lake's depths pulling at me like a lover's deadly embrace. And as the stars blurred above, I understood that the summer was beginning, not an end. A season marked not by warmth and light, but by the endless presence of darkness, watching, waiting beneath the surface. The lake's surface was deceptively calm as I inched closer, the moonlight tracing fragile silver lines across the water. The whispers that haunted my dreams seemed to rise from those depths, coaxing me like a siren's call. My skin prickled as the cool night air turned electric, a prelude to something beyond human comprehension. The scarred figure from my nightmares emerged, stepping silently from the black water, eyes glowing with a cold fire that burned away reason. I stood frozen, heart pounding like a wild drum. He spoke not a word, but his presence seeped into me, cold, suffocating, eternal. The water around him rippled, dark tendrils reaching out like fingers curling toward my ankles, pulling me into their abyss. Suddenly, I felt it, an overwhelming urge to flee clashing with an inescapable pull deeper into the darkness. The world spun, stars swirling out of focus as a cold grip tightened around my soul. I staggered backward, breath ragged, lungs burning. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices from the depths, telling tales of summer that would never end. A summer marked by shadows and those who dwell beneath. Turning from the lake, I felt eyes following every step. The warm night seemed suddenly hostile, swarmed by unseen watchers. I ran, branches tearing at my skin, the air thick with summer's deceptive warmth now stifling and ominous. Days blurred into nights without rest. The lake's curse gnawed at my mind, weaving nightmares into reality. The town's sun-drenched days couldn't cleanse the taint spreading inside me. I was no longer certain whether it was the lake's depths or my own crumbling sanity that haunted me most. I vowed to confront the darkness before it consumed me entirely, to break the endless summer curse that had bound me to the whispering waters below. The days blurred as I tried to hold on to fragments of normalcy, but each night seemed darker than the last. The summer heat pressed down relentlessly, but inside me was a chill that no sun could melt, an icy grip of fear that rooted me deep in shadows. Every creak in the house, every whisper of the wind outside the windows, reminded me I wasn't alone. My parents' attempts to help felt like distant echoes, their reassurances barely reaching me beneath the weight of dreadful certainty. The doctors called anxiety. The pills dulled the sharp edges, but never erased the deep-rooted horror. My sister's vacant eyes haunted my every thought, and the lake's dark secrets whispered to me in sleepless nights. I was trapped in a liminal world between childhood and something much darker, a place where nightmares bled into reality. Where the scarred man waited patiently beyond the window, tapping out a rhythm only I could hear. One humid evening, the tapping grew louder, more insistent, and when it came to whisper, soft but urgent, calling my name from the depths of that cursed lake, I knew then that the summer's heat was a cruel illusion, masking the endless night that waited beneath the surface. I would need to face the darkness, confront the shadows in the water, and the ones that lurked inside me before summer's end, or be consumed forever. I knew that whatever haunted the lake wasn't content to stay hidden forever. Its pull was a slow, insidious force drawing me back again and again into the darkness I refused to accept. The nights grew hotter, the air thicker, as if summer itself conspired to trap me beneath a veil of unseen terror. Inside me, the battle raged, a desperate struggle between fleeing from a nightmare and confronting the twisted truth lurking in the shadows. My mind was a fragile battleground where memories clashed with creeping madness, and every whispered name, every scratch on the window, threatened to break me. Then, on the edge of one suffocatingly warm night, I found myself returning to that cursed lake alone once more. The moon hung heavy and low, casting silver-blue streaks that shimmered on the water's surface, the same water that had become an abyss in my dreams. As I stepped onto the rocky shore, an unnatural chill rippled through the air, and the soft, taunting tapping started again. echoing around the stillness like a heartbeat. That's when I saw him, the scarred man, as clear as a reflection of the stars. His eyes blazed with fiery emptiness. He reached toward me, the darkness around him swelling like a living shadow, pulling at the edges of reality. I stumbled backward, breath caught in my throat, as his cold laugh echoed through the night, a sound devoid of humanity. The lake roared to life, water churning, swallowing the light, and hope beneath its tides. The world tipped sideways, and I was falling, slipping beneath the surface into the clutches of a summer that never ends. But just as the darkness closed in, something inside me ignited, a flicker of defiance, a desperate will to fight. I grasped the jagged rock beneath my feet and shoved against a watery pool, fighting back the cold grasp of the lake's ancient curse. With a fractured cry, I broke the surface, gasping for breath as I emerged into the humid night air, the scarred figure vanishing beneath the waves, silent and patient. The lake calmed, but I knew better than to believe it was over. The summer darkness had left a mark, a promise that it would return, that the shadows beneath the water would wait forever for their next victim. I thought the worst was behind me when I finally escaped the lake's shadowy grasp that night. I surfaced coughing, gasping salty water, the oppressive darkness reluctantly releasing its hold as the cold air hit my skin. The scarred man disappeared beneath the waves, his promise lingering like a curse whispered on the night wind. In the days that followed, the summer sun returned with cruel brilliance, baking the earth beneath a relentless heat. But despite the returning warmth, the chill inside me remained. I was not the same person I had been before that summer night. Innocence and ignorance washed away by a tide of fear and knowledge too terrible to name. My nightmares faded but never fully vanished. They became tangled in waking moments, shadows slipping at the edges of my vision, the gentle tapping echoing softly like a ghostly heartbeat. The lake's depths were silent now, but their dark promise persisted. The town slowly returned to its carefree summer rhythm, laughter and music drifting from porches and open windows. Yet I knew beneath the surface, beneath layers of sun-soaked joy, the darkness waited patiently, unchanged and unforgotten. I had faced the terror, battled the ancient darkness lurking beneath the water, and emerged still breathing, but forever marked. The summer that was supposed to be full of light and life had become a season of shadows, where fear lives long after the sun has set. And sometimes, on the hottest nights when the air turns thick and cicadas fall silent, I hear the tapping again, a reminder, a promise. Summer never truly ends there.